Are you going to the reception?
Oh, no, I couldn't. I don't know anyone.
I'm Bloberta. Bloberta Hymentacts.
I'm Clay. Puppington.
Clay Puppington. Nice to know you. Now are you going to the reception? I've been with you all the way, yeah, I'm along for the long ride. But I'm not walking away, yeah, I'm along for the long ride. I've been with you all the way, yeah, I'm along for the long ride.
Hello everyone, welcome to Moralton University. I'm Senna and today I'm joined by Wes, Lauren, and Glam. Today we are going to be doing a deep dive on the matriarch of the Puppington household, Mrs. Bloberta Puppington.
Cleaner.
Yummy!
Shapey, no.
Nice!
Not on your life. I have so little left.
This video will be the first in a 4-part series where we analyze the members of the Puppington family. Following this video will be an analysis of Clay's character, followed by an analysis of Shapey, and we'll be ending it with an analysis of Oral because he's the main character, and that video will likely be very, very long.
Bloberta is the wife of Clay Puppington, and the mother to Oral and Shapey Puppington. Originally, she's from the Hymentacts family, who seem to be notable in the community for their family choir. Like most characters in the show, Bloberta is first showcased in a more lighthearted manner. She is almost always shown cleaning or performing some other kind of stereotypical motherly duty. But as the show progresses, we get 2 significant deeper glimpses into her character in the episodes Numb and Help. These episodes recontextualize a lot of her previous scenes and bring her character into a new perspective. So Bloberta is the middle child of the Hymentacts family. The Hymentacts family consists of Mrs. Hymentacts, the mother of the house. Unfortunately, she does not have a name. When we first see Mrs. Hymentacts, she's conducting the practice for the family choir. She definitely exudes a kind of strictness. She's obviously the one who's running the house. There's also Raymond Hymentacts, who is Bloberta's father. He's seen drinking rather excessively during the short amount of time that we do see him, and he seems to have a tenuous relationship with his wife, and he wants to speak out about things in the house, but he very quickly stifles himself when there's some sort of prospect of him getting into trouble over it. Then we have Modella Hymentacts, who is the oldest child in the family. We don't really know much about Modella, except for the fact that her mother says that she has perfect pitch. She seems rather poised, and seems to care much about what her mother thinks of her. She's very quick to say it wasn't her that made the disruption during the practice. Though she doesn't shun Bloberta in any way, it's just to protect herself in that situation. The last member of the Hymentacts family is Lunchbox Hymentacts. He is the youngest member of the family and also the only son in the family, but we do see that he seems fairly connected to Mrs. Hymentacts. She does praise him, seemingly for doing nothing, but Lunchbox, unlike Modella, does openly mock Bloberta when she tries to chime in during the choir practice, which unfortunately is just something that happens within the family. Bloberta is not able to participate in the family choir, the one thing that she really genuinely seems interested in. She seems to have a passion for music that she's unfortunately not able to explore, and her voice is stifled in the process. From just the short glimpse we see of the Hymentacts, it becomes clear that there is an unhealthy structure at play. Notably, the Hymentacts could be assigned quite well to the triangular structure seen with dysfunctional family roles, that being the golden child, the invisible child, and the scapegoat. Bloberta fitting into the invisible child role. An invisible child is underacknowledged and undervalued. They are often ignored or dismissed, and often feel as if they don't exist at all in the eyes of those around them. An invisible child may often be regarded as not suitable to fill the needs deemed important, or may not fit into the role that is required of them. Invisible children may internalize the message that being unseen and quiet is what the parent wants, so being invisible may be the only path to getting love from them. In the case of Bloberta, she quietly relegates herself to her mother's suggestion, the thing that will make her useful, cleaning her room. Bloberta's desire to sing and be included with her family is so strong that she involuntarily chimes in when others are singing.
comes the bride, joyful in stride, straight to her master.
We see her stifle herself when she does join in, implying she's been reprimanded for adding her voice when she wasn't asked to, reinforcing her desire to feel wanted or valued. So is Bloberta untrained, or is she tone deaf? I believe that the answer to this question really affects the narrative here, because if Bloberta simply cannot learn how to sing no matter how much her mother tries to teach her, it paints a very different picture about why she isn't included. It doesn't excuse the actions at play, but it does change the context. If Bloberta is simply untrained, it means that her mother just simply did not want to waste time with her. It means that potentially she learned slower than her sister Modella. So how do we break this down? Singing is a skill. With practice and the right technique, anyone can learn to hone their voice. It's the same thing as learning how to play an instrument. Amusia is the exception. People with amusia, a neurological or genetic condition, have difficulty perceiving rhythm, melody, and chords, and may not be able to learn to sing. Bloberta is able to time herself well when she chimes in, which would indicate that she can at least follow rhythm and melody. Amusia is generally caused by organic trauma, for example a brain injury or inherited genetic defects. It is extremely rare and only affects less than 4% of the population. The term specifies an inability to differentiate pitches between notes like C and C sharp sounding the same to a tone-deaf person. Bloberta knows exactly how Modella's pitch is perfect. She was just declared superfluous and was never taught how to replicate precise pitches herself. The only other thing that can cause some form of tone deafness is lack of musical training, which is most likely the reason in Bloberta's case. It is possible that her mother saw her as difficult to teach in comparison to Modella, or had already relegated her as a spare from the start. She makes excuses for not including Bloberta.
Really, Bloberta? You know we don't need two sopranos, and your older sister has perfect pitch.
Her range is too close to her sister's, so why take the time to train her? She has no place. Modella was her mother's star pupil, and though we don't know the age gap between them, it is reasonable to assume it is rather small, as Modella also remained unmarried in Help. Though at the end of the day, Dino has stated in a few sources that he just thought the idea was funny. And whatever the reason is, the point stands that Bloberta is just not a good singer, despite the fact that her voice actress Britta Phillips is. That's the joke.
The cruel joke is I knew you loved singing and you're a good singer, and I made Bloberta a really bad singer. in the show.
But it was so much fun singing like Bloberta. Yeah. It's just totally unhinged.
Yeah.
We see during the short glimpse that we have into Bloberta's home life that it seems that the majority of her family either doesn't pay her mind or is openly antagonistic towards her, the exception to this being her father. Raymond is the one person in her family who we see show any level of concern for her. Bloberta displays a very apparent attachment to him, made very clear by her body language and tone when speaking to him. Despite his emotional availability being fragile at best, he still makes some sort of effort to make her feel seen. He is likely the only person she was ever able to share her grievances with. He claims that no one is perfect, and a mentality like that shows that he may find value in imperfect things, leading to an understanding that he is the most capable of finding value and therefore caring for Bloberta, who, to the rest of her family, seems to have no value. Her relationship to alcohol directly stems from her interactions with her father. To Bloberta, alcohol is a positive force.
I think it helps us to be better people. My father drinks.
She directly associates alcohol with her father. He is the only person who shows any level of care for her. So if he drinks and he's a good person, then it must be true, right? Notably in Help, before Bloberta mentions her father drinking, she mentions Jesus. Based on the fact that she linked her father directly after Jesus drinking, it's reasonable to believe that she equates the fact that they both drink to meaning that they're good people. To a further extent, she could be projecting the image of Jesus onto her father because they both suffer for the benefit of others. Her father seems to take the brunt of abuse from his wife, and they both saw value in seemingly valueless things. Bloberta herself displays early signs of alcohol dependency, but notably, once Clay spoiled her views of it, she states firmly that she doesn't drink. When we do see her drink, it tends to be as a stress reaction. Key moments when drinking seems to be to soften the blow of rejection and her negative emotions. For example, after she's shunned by her family, and she is forced to relegate herself to solidarity. She also drinks after the short exchange with her father. In that exchange, she's not able to fully connect with him as much as she would like to. It's clear that she can't even touch him. And when she says she loves him, he doesn't even reciprocate the words. She also drinks after Danielle rejects her in Numb, which is the only time we ever see her drink after the events of Help. Until the events of Help, Bloberta believed that drinking helped you become a better person. But upon seeing Clay's drunken actions, she instead believes that drinking reveals your true self, which is why she says she doesn't drink, because in the series proper, we see that she refuses to show her true self. This mindset implies that she has a very low view of herself, because in lieu of showing herself honestly, she instead maintains the perfect appearance. Note the bar scene from Help, where she briefly looks at her own pitiful reflection before her anger flares up and she knocks Clay out. In that moment, she realized the state that she was in, and pinned her low emotional feeling onto Clay, as if he was the cause of it. He shattered her worldview with his actions. In Numb, we see her break this resolution against drinking in a brief moment, and immediately afterwards, she reveals a truth about herself, her desperation for companionship in this situation towards Putty. Considering that we don't see her drink after that in any other episodes besides the previous scene mentioned, it's likely that she was able to quit without major withdrawal, insinuating she wasn't far along enough to have developed a full-blown state of dependency. It should be noted that although Bloberta is often relegated to the background, this doesn't mean she desires to be there. Her desire to be included in Censordol's picketing shows a willingness to work for acceptance. She wanted desperately to be included in a group, regardless of whether she was capable of the work or not. Her home life revolves around the family choir, one that excludes a member of the family purposefully. She wants, desperately, a place to be, regardless of what happens to her or what she needs to do when she's there. So why did Bloberta not try to find a way out of her situation? She did. She didn't wait around to be rescued or plan on idling forever. Her societal expectations pose a hard limit on the height of her aspirations. Women in Moralton are shown as either teachers, nurses, or librarians. The only remaining option is to be a good wife or mother. Due to her constant rejection from all circles of her life, finding salvation in a man meant, to her, that someone would have a desire for her. As such, finding a husband was a cure to all of her ailments. She would feel wanted, she would have genuine value to someone, and she would be the ideal wife and mother to uphold that value. As previously mentioned, she's an outcast in every aspect of her life, home, social circles, etc. She feels a need for acceptance, a need to be useful and wanted as a result. When we see Bloberta interact with her mother, she specifically frames her direction to Bloberta as helping her out when she asks her to clean her room.
Why don't you help me out and do something useful, dear? Like, clean your room.
Each action Bloberta makes in the series stems from her desire to be helpful, lamenting not being asked for advice, showing a desire to be wanted, constantly cleaning, even to the point of utilizing products to create a mess just to clean more, which we see showcased in some of the product names on the bottles in Oral's movie premiere, and at times resorts to cleaning the products themselves. When not cleaning, even her knitting is to create something useful, in a desperate pursuit to have meaning for herself, regardless of whether or not what she's doing is actually helpful, so long as she feels it's created value for herself.
We here at Moralton University may have our PhDs in puppinometry, but we are not licensed psychiatric professionals. However, as we often do, we like to speculate about the mental states of the characters and how that could translate into real life. So this isn't an official diagnosis by any means. However, it's a concept that we found ourselves exploring very heavily for both Clay and Bloberta. The idea of borderline personality disorder. Borderline personality disorder, it's a cluster B personality disorder that's characterized by very reactive moods, impulsivity, difficulty regulating emotions, also unstable relationships both with other people and with yourself, your own identity. However, the thing that best characterizes borderline personality disorder is an all-encompassing fear of abandonment. Something that people often misunderstand is that it's very easy and possible to have a fear of abandonment and to feel enough of abandonment to develop the disorder with two parents in your life. One parent, like Raymond, her father, who's physically there in person, but so distant that she can't even touch him. And Mrs. Hymentacts, who is almost the human version of one of those couches with the plastic over it. Bloberta is treated as though she could be replaced in every facet of herself in her life and not be missed, which is something that travels from her childhood into her marriage with Clay. It's something he perpetuates because as a man who didn't want a bride at his own wedding, what use would he have for the bride afterwards? You'll hear us say this many times, and I'm pretty sure I said it earlier in the video, but these characters are very defined by their relationships, and that goes for people with borderline personality disorder especially. Something that many people with BPD experience is seeing relationships as much more intimate than they are in reality. A good example to start out with would be her relationship with Danielle. It's an obvious but not very strong example since, he manipulated her with a specific purpose, but she doesn't give up on the hope that there could be something there, even after years of him only reaching out to Clay and pretty much ignoring her existence entirely. Putty is a middling level example. as we, the audience, know, he's usually directing his sermons at some people. So she wasn't exactly crazy when she assumed that he was talking about Shapey in Best Christmas Ever. It goes to reason that someone who has this confirmed to them, who also deeply desires companionship, would see a level of covert communication on the topic of romance. However, what I feel is the best example of this phenomenon is what happens between her and Dr. Potter's Wheel. He definitely leads her on to it's a debatable extent, but she somersaults to the conclusion that there's something more there. She puts all her eggs in one basket, so to speak, and latches on to Dr. Potter's Wheel through his handkerchief.
You don't even care about me.
Well, I care for you. I'm a doctor.
But I thought that you really...
These lines of dialogue and the delivery behind them are highly indicative of the fact that Bloberta's main concern in seeking out these affairs is for a genuine connection and not purely a sexual one. She puts emphasis on how she thought of Potter's Wheel, which is an act that gave her almost instant gratification due to her misguided impression that he felt the same way that she did. These lines come off as cruel, but at the end of the day, it is true that is the reality of their relationship. Bloberta is also shown to hold a distinct need to preserve her outward appearance despite these interactions. Socially, she desires to uphold her housewife persona. Physically, she never allows herself to let any cracks show. In Turn the Other Cheek, she's shown getting ready for an hour just to speak to Oral for a moment, only to get back in bed afterwards. In Numb, she refuses to cry in front of Clay, shutting her emotions off entirely once she notices him. There's a scene where she's knitting and she goes,
Yarn, 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 yarn.
Repeatedly, having some kind of mental breakdown-esque moment, which gets cut off as soon as Clay walks through the door. This and her feral breakdown in front of Poppet portray that Blobs does seem to feel things much more intensely than her often monotone and somber tone would portray, which contrasts the numbness that is central to her character. Numb is a very significant word when it comes to Bloberta, as the show itself shows us. It encapsulates Bloberta's state in the day-to-day, showing that she generally goes through the motions of life. As it relates to her personal needs, she feels numb to the sensations she deeply desires to feel. With the failure of her relationship to her husband and her inability to form meaningful relationships with others, she resorts to extreme measures of self-pleasure in order to feel something. These items do resemble sex toys, but they are legitimate power tools, as we know. She goes to a hardware store to acquire them. Despite the gradual increase in size and power, she doesn't seem to derive any actual pleasure from these objects. The only time we see her react positively to using these is when she takes her prescription. Her first use of the hand jack is indicative of this. She also refers to the hand jack as a horrible apparatus, implying she's aware of the extreme nature of the tool, which she then throws away with little hesitation once she believes Potter's Wheel has feelings for her. She then reaches climax by the slightest touch while thinking of him. It can be inferred that her reliance on toys is due to a lack of physical and or emotional fulfillment from Clay. That lack of fulfillment from Clay is also why she sought a sexual connection with others in Morrilton. That connection can often be used as a stepping stone to a deeper connection, and generally a sexual connection is easier to establish first when dealing with men. Her departure from the notion of numb is seen immediately when she believes someone genuinely cares about her. The episode itself, of the same name, revolves around showcasing a moment for her to literally be as numb as she feels emotionally. And the moment she believes she doesn't have to feel numb, she is shut down harshly and quickly, ending with her resuming her numb state when Clay finds her outside of Oral's room.
Societal pressures and a poor family life can push someone like Bloberta to the point that we see at the end of Help. For a woman in Morrilton, there are very few options outside of motherhood, and the pressure to find a husband and turn a purpose is pushed upon her as a woman in a conservative circle. Her mindset is a product of that environment. Because she feels unwanted, she needs somebody to need her. And marriage is a socially acceptable way to get out of her mother's house because she does not enjoy living there, and having a husband will give her a sense of purpose. So Bloberta desires to give herself purpose by helping Clay, and that turns into a cry for help, which he responds to. The beginning of their interaction quickly stagnates as their conversation turns awkward. In that situation, she deems that the drinks are necessary to allow them to open up to each other. In such an environment, drinking is naturally social. She pushes him regardless of his refusal afterward due to her perspective of alcohol being a solely positive influence and that she often uses it to soothe her own issues. The dynamic shifts from Bloberta confidently flirting with Clay to her losing control over him as he gets drunker. In a moment of rage and frustration, she punches him and then tries to salvage the relationship by nursing him back to health. Bloberta came from a home where her family didn't open up to each other, except for when her father rarely did show her warmth. She was very used to cold, rigid ways of communicating, such as stilted, articulate ways of talking and a high emphasis on having a neat and clean appearance. Clay, on the other hand, grew up hugged a lot by his mother, and on losing her, he looks for physical affection from his father. On the other hand, Bloberta hesitates to even touch her father because the link between them is so fragile. It's like he would close up if she did. So they grew up communicating in opposite ways. Clay in Before Oral is very animated when he's younger, but he loses the high energy in the series proper, possibly to match Bloberta's low energy style communication, as well as the Protestant environment they're in. Bloberta being the one to suggest corporal punishment when Clay was hesitant to do it implies that the act was normalized around her to some extent. It isn't very far of a stretch considering that we see Mrs. Hymentacts hit lunchbox and we do see Raymond flinch from her as well. Worth noting that her suggestion is likely due to her belief that traditional family roles are required to be followed, but she declares the punishments are Clay's responsibility despite witnessing her mother carry out the punishments in the family. The only way they seem to bond is over their co-belligerence. They will laugh together at other people and make jokes at others' expense, but this is the only time they ever get along. Bloberta seemed to show genuine interest in Clay early in their relationship. At their wedding, she's smiling until she sees how miserable he looks. In the wedding photos, she looks sad and angry and eventually cries about how he's acting once they get pulled over for drunk driving. Over time, through a combination of lack of intimacy and general incompatibility, Bloberta and Clay grow so resentful of one another that they cannot stand each other. They have to make a concentrated effort to tolerate each other. Bloberta was easily manipulated through the prospect of affection, similar to what happened with Potter's Wheel. She was so desperate she almost repeated the cycle with him. This affair was not a purely sexual one and stemmed from a distinct lack of emotional validation. In episode 2 of our series, we discuss how Danielle committed rape by deception in order to get closer to Clay by impregnating Bloberta and inserting a child who's not Clay's into the family. She attempts to retread their relationship in Numb because she believed that he liked her once.
To understand Bloberta as a mother, we have to look back at the episode Help. In that episode, an equivalent is drawn between Clay's drinking and her cleaning. Cleaning is like an addiction that takes her away from her family, even if it seems like it's her role that she's performing correctly. She cleans to avoid feelings of filth. She doesn't want to feel filthy herself, and she sees others around her as filthy, so she cleans to fix that. Specifically, she saw immoral actions as filthy and projected that around her as something she wanted to clean. When she cleans, that provides an opportunity to be of value, which we know she's desperate for, but also acts as a solution to getting rid of unwanted behavior. Clay's depraved behavior was what drove her to start cleaning, and that dynamic hasn't stopped in their current marriage. She also cleans to feel erotic satisfaction. If anything, this is more so to fill a hole in her life and not necessarily that she is turned on by the act in a literal sense. Another purpose that cleaning serves is to help her avoid interaction with her family. Cleaning helps distract her from her situation, and she's able to lose herself in it, especially since she feels lost in her situation, and cleaning is often used as a means to feel in control of something. When she cleans, she sometimes dissociates. One example of this is in the episode The Blessed Union. When she's cleaning the rug in Clay's study, she's completely unaware and on autopilot while Clay gives Oral a lecture. Because Bloberta spends so much time cleaning and dissociating, she's often very neglectful as a parent. Oral doesn't perceive her as warm, though she is cordial with him and shows a surface-level amount of concern at times. In some ways, she almost maintains a similar relationship to the one she had with her father, which influences her in adulthood. It is loose, nebulous, and undefined, but she has a level of care for her children that is able to rear its head every so often, just like Raymond did for her. She feels defeated in her marriage, and that affects her ability to bond with her children. She struggles to be emotionally available or show that she cares about them. It's notable that she never says that she loves her children. The only time she shows any excitement when talking to Oral is when he wants to talk about something that she cares about. In the episode Courtship, Oral asks whether it's okay for a woman to manipulate a man into buying presents for her. She is really excited about this question and immediately sits Oral down to give him a manicure, and she talks to him more fondly than she has at any other point in the series. Bloberta's relationship with Shapey is one of her most fascinating. For her, Shapey serves as a reminder to what could have been, as well as a tool that allows her to maintain the appearance of a good mother. In the initial stages of Bloberta's affair with Danielle, she was hopeful that she'd found someone who genuinely cared about her. She hoped that this affair could lead to something better, but it only led to her raising his illegitimate child with the man she doesn't love. Her pregnancy with Shapey has two noticeable effects on her. The first is that it gives her a sense of excitement about being a mother. We see her laying on the bed, excitedly saying she's about a month along, and she's shaking the rattle that she's bought for him. She also feels a sense of hope that after Shapey's born, she might have Danielle to go home to instead of Clay. She's miserable in her marriage, and this gives her hope for a new beginning where she can be happy. Most of the time, Bloberta ignores Shapey, and she can't even look at him. There's a few potential reasons for this. The first is that he is a constant reminder of the affair that she had and the feelings that she holds about the affair that are difficult for her to cope with. She also can't acknowledge him properly without also acknowledging that he isn't a baby anymore and that he has more emotional needs than simply being fed. Although she's often dismissive of Shapey, she can't afford to lose the value that breastfeeding gives her. She feels needed when she breastfeeds him. This leads to her being somewhat hot and cold with him. At times, she coddles him and holds him close so he can be fed. At other times, she pushes him away, brays him, or verbally dismisses him. There are multiple instances of Bloberta referring to Shapey as younger than he really is. In Presents for God, she claims his soul hasn't even developed fingers yet. In Maturity, Clay has to point out Shapey's age to her in reference to him still breastfeeding. In Numb, she refers to Shapey as a baby when speaking to Poppet on the phone. This implies Bloberta still views Shapey as a defenseless baby, a perception she needs in order to maintain the appearance of and gain the value of being a good mother. She knows that she won't be having any more children with Clay, so Shapey needs to remain a baby for her to keep the sense of self-worth that she has. She continues to breastfeed Shapey because, to her, that is what a good mother does for her baby, and in doing so, she is invaluable. In Sacrifice, her perception of Shapey is shattered when he speaks to her genuinely and forces her to recognize that he is not the baby she's been equating him to. Rather, he's a real person who wants to be seen and validated. Ironically, Bloberta's treatment of Shapey echoes her own childhood in many ways. Shapey is unseen and unheard, and he has a desired closeness to his preferred parent, Bloberta. Even Shapey's room mimics her childhood one. It's filled with a ramshackle assortment of items, resembling a disorganized storage room more than a child's room. It's also notable that it's the only room in the house that is never cleaned. Like many other characters in the series, Bloberta's character arc is incomplete. One of the greatest questions about her character in the third season is, why didn't she leave Clay? Especially after he shot Oral on the hunting trip, something that she's fully aware of. Why wouldn't she leave her husband, who is clearly a threat to the children? There's a few reasons for this, based on her place in Morrilton's society. The first is financial insecurity. Bloberta is a stay-at-home mother and a housewife. She doesn't have an income of her own, so she wouldn't be able to financially support herself if she were to divorce Clay. Another major reason is a fear of judgment from others. Bloberta prioritizes keeping up appearances and maintaining an upstanding image in the community. If she were to divorce Clay based on her place in Morrilton's society. The first is financial insecurity. Bloberta is a stay-at-home mother and a housewife. She doesn't have an income of her own, so she wouldn't be able to financially support herself if she were to divorce Clay. Another major reason is a fear of judgment from others. Bloberta prioritizes keeping up appearances and maintaining an upstanding image in the community. If she were to divorce Clay, she would open herself up to judgment from others just by being a divorced woman. She might have to move to the Aloneford, which in itself is a stigma. She also has no fallback options. At the point that the series left off, Bloberta has no other romantic prospects. sex. She's been rejected by Danielle, Putty, and Potter's Wheel. This links back to financial insecurity. Without a fallback option through marriage to another man, she doesn't have the security of knowing she'll have a place to go, food on the table, or safety for herself and the kids. Another reason is her fear of being alone. We know that Bloberta needs to feel needed. This is part of why she ended up married to Clay in the first place. Additionally, the state of her current home life isn't dissimilar from her childhood home life. She's often relegated to the background, so in a way she's already used to such treatment.
Due to the early cancellation of the series, Bloberta's character arc was left unfinished. From what little we do know, it was planned that Bloberta would begin an affair with Officer Roger Papermouth, Morrilton's cowardly but well-meaning police officer. We even saw a slight build-up for Roger's character in Sundays, though he was mostly relegated to the background before that. The only thing we know about their meeting is that the two would cross paths in front of the Aloneford, as they both end up trying to take Nurse Bendy's discarded Sunny Bear. The reasons for this were never specified, but Roger ends up giving the bear to Bloberta in an act of chivalry. After that, the two begin seeing each other. Though information on this is scarce, there was a bit of discussion in an Adult Swim forum thread that insinuated it would be good for the both of them. It's possible that this affair could have been the opportunity Bloberta needed to finally give her the courage to get that divorce, but we'll never know.
Like, did you talk about the tone deaf versus thing?
Okay, that's a good. Let's just start with that because it's our most heated debate. It's so hilarious. So I actually do think that particular point does have an effect on the narrative. Personally, I think that if we were to consider that Bloberta could not learn at all, it kind of makes her mom kind of justified in not allowing her to participate. Not saying that you should just not have your child participate in family events, but it's slightly more reasonable in a way.
I don't see it that way. I feel like, if she couldn't sing, she could still do something else, She still understands rhythm. Maybe have her drum.
That's very true. It depends on how you use the opinion that you have, in a sense.
That's true, yeah. You could make it bad, I guess, on both sides as well. I don't know, guys. The poll speaks for itself. Cut to the poll results. Anyway.
Something interesting that I saw in the comments of the polls is that I wasn't the only person who never had any idea that she was meant to be a bad singer at all.
Yeah, I think so.
So, thing is, I think it's because Britta Phillips is just such a good singer that she's bad at being a bad singer.
Exactly.
I mean, yeah. I think I can definitely tell the difference once it was called attention to me, but I can understand, first, if someone doesn't have, a high understanding of, musical tone and scale, that they would not potentially see that. But at first I didn't think about it, and I was like, wow, she's singing really high. That's I think the first thing I ever noticed. But yeah, but you can, when you listen to it a little closer, there is there's some wavering in the voice, and I think that the notes are
some
definitely
pitchy
not
notes.
Right. Yeah, she's pitchy is the best way to explain her voice.
Yeah. I like to sing myself at synagogue, and I tend to resort to the higher parts of my register because I'm not trained either. So I sound a little bit like her sometimes. So I guess that's part of why my brain was like, "What do you mean this is garbage?"
Yeah, I mean, when you're singing in a head voice is weird. I don't know. I'm not going to get into a whole discussion about this because none of us are really trained singers, as far as I understand.
Thing is, you don't have to be trained to be able to sing, and it's just a weird thing that she grew up in a house of musicians, and she's still unable to match these really specific notes. So I wonder. I mean, I know it's supposed to be a joke, but. What puppet disorder does she have?
Well, I mean, it's honestly not everybody can listen by ear and pick something up too. I mean, if she literally was not trained at all by their mother, if she just didn't feel like giving her the time of day because she had two daughters and one of them was better at it than the other, blah blah blah. There's many other ways that you could spin it, but it's it could go either way. I can admit it can go either way. But I just think it's... Sorry, go ahead, Glam.
There's so many variables, too. I watched this video about why the singing in the live-action Les Mis movie was so bad, and the dude, Sideways, I believe is the name of the channel, he went into all the different things that singers do to protect their voices. Like, some singers, they'll put a wet rag around their nose and mouth when they go up on airplanes because the air is so dry. So Bloberta's constantly stifling her voice, especially at such a high register. I could see that damaging it too. And the mental aspect of it, not just physical, constantly being told that you are not good at singing, your body it holds itself back. Like the same way that you can't like bite your own finger off.
Yeah, that's a really good point actually though, because yeah, she is stifling herself, like, and it's just, to me, it's very sad. Like, obviously that is her passion. Singing is her passion. She's doing it even after she's left her family. Like they're very, growing up in a family with people who are so musically inclined, and like being just surrounded by that and not being able to join in is just like one of the most heartbreaking things to me. Like, I know we didn't see a lot of her childhood, but it's just depressing to think about, for me at least. It's just one of those things.
She's made to feel invisible. She's made to feel like she doesn't exist.
And she clearly seems to care a lot about it. I mean, even when we see her walk into the reception, she almost instantly, like, it's comical, obviously, but it's like she meeps, and it's like, she instantly stifles herself. Yeah, I mean, there's more to it, obviously, but we never got it. And at the end of the day, the verdict, obviously, get the judge's gavel out. Dino thought it was funny, guys. It's funny.
It was a joke.
Because Britta is a very good singer, and she was in one of the first roles that she had was a musical role singing for Gem and the Holograms. So, or as Dino calls it, Gem and the Argonauts. So, I do want to talk a little bit about Raymond, because I know we talked a lot about how she puts him on a pedestal, so to speak. I mean, in a way, it's like, of course she would do that, because if she's being ostracized or whole life and her own family, and like one person is actually paying her any kind of attention, despite how, I don't want to say he's not trying. He's trying to try, guys. He's trying to try. He's not giving enough, like,
it's definitely, there's a lot of layers to it. It's difficult to say, because I guess it depends on how much empathy the viewer has for like that kind of person, their own situation, if they were raised with a parent similar. Because yeah, he is trying to try, but there are other people who would say, that's just not good enough. He's a grown adult man. And especially in the time period, Mrs. Hymentacts can be a nagging bitch all she wants, but socially and societally, he would have the power in the household, but it's not how things always work.
Well, that's like, we really don't know what's going on in their house, and it's really implied that Mrs. Hymentacts she uses corporal punishment to control everybody, and I think including Raymond. So, if it's that level of abusive situation for him, then I could understand why he's become such a coward.
And like at the very least, she's like yelling at him whenever he does anything that she dislikes. She does that in the episode. So even if she's not using corporal punishment on him, she's definitely yelling at him all the time.
Yeah.
What's interesting, so the way that like he's kind of giving her the bare minimum, but it means a lot to her. So that's kind of priming her for the treatment, the sort of aloofness that she gets from Clay when she first marries him.
Yeah. A lot of the things that, okay, I don't want to say there's like direct, I don't know if I want to call them parallels, but like, it's like, in a way, she at the start, she was projecting the image of her father onto him because of how she associates alcohol with her father and all that, and how it's a positive force. But quickly, she has to learn that it doesn't affect everybody that way. And essentially, she is projecting that image of her father onto Clay, no matter what the intent is, because that's something that she feels comfortable with. And it obviously it destroyed him, but like, what am I trying to say? I'm so sorry, guys.
Well, I get what you mean. With her, when we see her drinking, besides at the wedding, she has that interaction with her mother, and then she runs to her room and she seeks out the comfort of alcohol. It presumably does the same thing for her, or at least a similar thing for her, as she assumes that it does for Raymond. So I don't know how much exposure she would have to the idea that somebody could be a depressed drunk, or an angry drunk, or a withdrawn drunk.
Yeah, I mean, I would say Raymond is a withdrawn drunk. But yeah, I don't think she has like any kind of understanding of the sort of spectrum of reactions people can have to alcohol. And, you know, with Clay, I mean, we know that Angela was a heavy drinker. So, you know, maybe he's, I don't know, predisposed towards alcoholism. Like, I don't know, that can be a kind of genetic thing. Like maybe he has some kind of genetic predisposition to not be able to handle alcohol well. That's just speculation, of course. We don't know that for sure.
I mean, I think it makes sense.
I've never thought about that. Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
But I mean, for Bloberta, she doesn't have any way of understanding that Clay might not be able to consume alcohol and have it be just like something that helps him relax or be more social or whatever. Like for him, it's this deeply addicting thing that really negatively impacts his mental health. For her, it's just, you know, it relaxes you. It helps you be a better person. It probably helps her father show her even those small crumbs of affection. Maybe he can't do it when he's sober.
Exactly. He's already such a person that's withdrawn into himself. So it's like, how can she compare that to what a normal person would act like?
Well, with Bloberta, she's, you know, she's really clearly an example of like a kid who watched a parent cope with alcohol and is now predisposed to using that as a coping mechanism because of having that normalized in her life. You know, the fact that she was able to give it up so quickly, like she probably wasn't drinking for very long.
Yeah, well, that's like it is a really good point because you don't get to really see the extent of it outside of the episode. I would say that she was potentially developing something, but it didn't get far enough because of the circumstances of what happened. Obviously, the situation turned her off on it completely. She just didn't want anything to do with it after that, which is why I feel she does have such a narrow view of it, because you're gonna change your habits completely because of one person. I don't know. Their interaction is so interesting. Because, like, obviously she kind of passed her own developing addiction onto him.
But I think, because, you know, the home she grew up in, her parents, you know, there's very clearly this power imbalance where her mother is, you know, very domineering over her father. And the fact that, like, what happens when they're at the reception is that she feels really disgusted with him all of a sudden. And then she feels that about herself. And then immediately she turns it back out on him. And first she hits him and then she starts being sweet to him. Well, so I feel like that's something she might have seen at home.
I do like that comparison. The way that I interpreted that scene, it kind of links back around to her thought process and how she explains it to Oral is how I see it. In her eyes, like, she doesn't know what's going on in his head. He's being a lecherous person in that situation. She saw him as being, like, filthy, to use her own word there. So she immediately after seeing him acting in a way that she doesn't think is, you know, appealing or however you want to spin that, and she then looks at the reflection of herself, and when she sees how pathetic that she looks, that's when her anger flares up, and then she decides she wants to punch him. So, like, obviously she was feeling a bad way about herself and she redirected that anger onto him. The way she sees it, he ruined their date together. They weren't really, like, were they really on a date, guys? Like,
Not like, from his perspective.
It was a situation something.
Not even a situationship.
It was an outing between two people. Anyway, I think to her it's kind of like she's seeing this is how she really is. It rounds back to her, like, wanting to preserve her self-image. You know, she thinks, because she tells Oral this, that alcohol makes your true nature come out because that's what she saw in Clay. She thought that was who he was as a person. We know that that's not entirely true, but that's her perspective. So the way that I see it is that in that moment she sees herself and how she truly is on the inside, and then she redirects that back at Clay because she gets upset about it.
Oh, that's such an interesting point.
That's kind of how it panned in my head when that took a lot of rewatches to think about that. You know, like, I've watched Hell probably at least 35 times. Could be more.
That's such an interesting point, though. I never really thought of it that way. That's so interesting, though. Like, I think, it makes a lot of sense to interpret it that she's having all these negative feelings about herself and who she is and the situation she's in. And instead of kind of confronting that, it's easier for her to just redirect at Clay. I think that's very in character for her. I think that's a really interesting and, like, textually appropriate way to interpret that. Like, I like that a lot.
It puts that much more of a bitter taste in the audience's mouth that in both of their own ways, there was inklings from the very beginning of an awareness of what they were getting themselves into.
Yeah.
Especially on Blob's part for obvious reasons.
Well, I mean, she knocks him out, and I mean, it was nighttime or like midday, right, when the reception started, and she chose to sit there for hours. She was probably contemplating everything. She could have left at any time, but she clearly thought that her future hinged on this moment, so she decides to attempt to try to win him over at the end there. And I mean, she did something. I mean,
this is kind of just a random thought. Do you think the reception ended when she punched him?
I think it was already over.
I think it was, I mean, it was clearly, it was like in the middle of it, and then I don't think, now I have to think and try to imagine like how everyone reacted to that in the room. Like what happened after, like
Bloberta, what the fuck?
Standing there, like she knocked his ass out, like
because like when he comes to, it's not like he's in some random spot. He's still in the middle of the dance floor.
Yeah, the
So
glass, there's broken glass behind his head, like from him dropping his.
She didn't even clean up the hours he was laying there.
She's just like, you fell.
Toxic ASMR. I mean,
and like it in a way, of course, she has a very negative relationship with her mother, and she loves her father. So one would assume she would be in a position to not emulate any part of that relationship. But in a way, in a very horrible way, Mrs. Hymentacts has kind of crafted the husband that she wants. And it's something that Bloberta, at least subconsciously, has as a possibility in the back of her mind, if you get what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, men are fixable creatures. So that you're never going to find a man that's in a functional state. You're going to have to make him that way.
That's fucked. Like, because, obviously she wouldn't want to emulate her mother in any way. I think that she tries her best to not do that. She distances herself from her family. She's very hands-off, whereas her mother was clearly very controlling. It's kind of like...
Still, though, even if you don't want to continue a cycle of abuse, sometimes, like, people don't have the self-awareness to not do it.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like that's what happened with her.
Kind of like those Greek myths where the hero spends so much time trying to escape their fate that they end up doing it anyway.
Yeah.
It's like with that kind of thing, I mean, it becomes ingrained in you as a child. When you see that stuff growing up, think of how many people say, I don't want to turn out like my parent, and then those traits will seep into you over time. Like, some people can avoid that. There's just gonna be moments where you're like, damn, I sound like my mom, or damn, I sound like my dad, blah blah blah. But but it's like with her, she's kind of like almost a blend of both. I think she tries to be more of like her father, which is why she's so hands off and doesn't have like a very tight emotional connection with anybody in her family, or the Puppington family. But in certain aspects, like her most toxic aspects, when she's arguing, when she's doing things like lashing out and hitting Clay, which if her mother was physically abusing Raymond, that adds another layer of just like strange parallel and perspective over that. When she's at her worst, I feel like some of those things I could imagine coming out of her mother's mouth, like things like, oh, why don't you find your precious father and you spend Christmas with him together? Like, I could imagine Mrs. Hymentacts saying something like that to her.
100%.
Like, I mean, but that probably is something that was said to her at some point.
It probably was.
And it's not one-to-one or anything, but she kind of does have a kind of, forget if we've touched on it before, about how, Shapey and Blobs as people have parallels between the two of them. She's in a way accidentally emulated the Modella and Bloberta dichotomy with Oral and Shapey, with who she talks to, who more, the way she talks to them, the way she interacts with them. It makes it bittersweet, because when Shapey pours his heart out to her for a moment and she listens and hears him, it's a step towards breaking the cycle.
Yes, it's just about how she goes about it after the fact, which is an unfortunate thing, obviously, that we were robbed of. Is getting to see all this stuff developed. I've also thought about that, and she may not be able to make a genuine connection with him, though I will put a pin.
I think really with what I was saying, it flows best into some of the things that you wanted to bring up with Numb, and how people take the sexual aspect of the situation and wash that as the entire motivation behind the situation.
I did want to talk about that, because I find it's not something I see all the time, but I feel like it's important to note that even though the episode breaks down to obviously the forefront, what is being showcased is sexual, but that is not the entire extent of what she desires. I mean, very important line from Help, because it's weird. Nobody talks like this, but one of the girls in the background says something very, very stiff, just for the sake of kind of driving home the narrative for the viewer. She says, "Oh, it feels so nice to be wanted." Nobody talks like that. No, you're not hanging out with your friends and they're going, "Damn, today I feel so great that I'm so wanted." Like,
for me, it's almost like they're vocalizing what Bloberta thinks getting an engagement ring would be like.
Exactly. Yeah. It goes to when somebody doesn't necessarily have a fully stable sense of identity, even in a society that, kind of provides a predetermined one for them. It gets to a point where it's not at all about the actual situations itself and how you get them, but what they can do for you, how it makes you feel.
Exactly, yeah. And obviously, like, they wanted to drive a lot of her motivators across in Help, so they had to kind of use that kind of language to kind of show it. Kind of like circling back to Numb. I just feel like it kind of muddies the waters a little bit if you focus too much on the sexual side of it, because really what it boils down to is that she is just a woman with like regular needs, and it's obviously in Morrilton that's taboo to begin with. Like, that's kind of why it has to be so over the top, because it is a taboo thing. You can't even go to a normal store and get
it says a lot about just how lonely she is and how unwanted she feels, and what she does in the episode is drastic, and it's it gets that shocked response, and it shows that she's so willing to put herself out there to get something from someone, because she's not getting anything in her marriage, like literally nothing. So she doesn't care if it's painful, and doesn't care if like it's somebody who's desperate as putty, or she's desperate herself. She's looking for something. She wants to be wanted.
Yeah.
She wants someone to want her.
Yeah, I don't think it was in a purely sexual sense though. Because here's the thing, because if it's just if you paint it as just a sexual sense, then it's a woman just trying to have an affair because she wants to get fulfillment out of something. And it's like, yes, that is the degree of it, but we see by the way that she she goes back to someone that she thinks did like her. We see that Danielle was courting her, he was dating her in some capacity, because that's the person she goes back to first. She thinks maybe there's something there, but obviously there's not on Danielle's side. With Putty, like, that's everybody knows how desperate Putty is.
I think a good way of putting her situation is, in any normal relationship, it's perfectly normal for somebody to need sex, to want sex, and for not having sex be a deal breaker. But what I mean by that, and to have not having sex be a deal breaker for them, but that doesn't necessarily mean for anybody, not just Bloberta, that sex is what drives their relationship. It's an important factor that plays within the emotions. For Bloberta, you can't have one without the other. Like, she does experience one without the other, because if we look at her interactions with Potter's Wheel, the crumbs that she believes him to be giving her are not romantic in any sense. They're horny, but she's still using that to fuel something within her emotionally.
She really craves, like, for her, like, it's not just sex. She doesn't just want to get off. Like, it's like she also really craves the emotional intimacy that sex can bring. And I think sex is just in here is kind of like this physical manifestation of all of this like human connection she's lacking. And like with Potter's Wheel, when he's giving her these crumbs and she's reading into it and she's like, oh, like, he wants me, he really feels something for me. It's something like he puts his like hand on her leg and he kind of like caresses her a bit, or he gives like the handkerchief.
She thinks he cares. She thinks he cares.
Exactly.
Which is something that she's not getting at all in her marriage, and that's what she's looking for.
I think she read, and if you hear the way, like, it was always the way that she spoke and the line delivery between all of their exchanges, but especially near the end, that to me it feels like obvious. It's so obvious to the audience that it just wants to use her in order to get off. It's very clear to the audience, but the way that she's reading it, she says you don't even care about me. Like, she thinks that he had some sort of genuine care for her. I just feel like the word care is very important there. She just wants some sort of connection. She wants someone to care about her the same way that, you know, that she saw these women like getting into marriages and she thought that their lives were perfect because they were getting married.
I almost wonder if it would be beneficial for people to like, we have Clay and Danielle as one relationship, and we have Bloberta with, I suppose, herself and her general romantic exploits on the other. Danielle is a very, you know, sexual person, but we also see that there is a lot of romance intertwined with his pursuit of Clay. And I think it would help people understanding if, I mean, obviously, you know, Bloberta isn't doing the same kind of things that Danielle is doing in the pursuit of his romantic exploits, but it's a lot easier for people to understand that in one situation, the romance and the sex are intertwined and it's not just purely one without the other. Then it might help them understand that it's the case for Bloberta as well.
I think that's just why Numb is just like so hard to interpret, because there's so much shit going on that's like so like hard to think about, I guess. Like the concept of her, you know, like being so desperate to feel something that she literally mutilates herself with a handheld jackhammer. Like, you know, it's a hard episode to watch. I mean, I think it and nature go hand in hand with how the kind of reaction, like they elicit a strong reaction for two very different things, but it's just two people who are hurting, and this is kind of how they're showing their hurt. Clay, he has his breakdown, but in
well, you see both sides of the problem, where, you know, he feels trapped and, you know, doesn't want any of it, and she just so desperately wants to feel needed and wanted and loved and cared for, and he can't give her that.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like neither of their faults, that they're just so incompatible.
Yeah, it just shows how incompatible they are. And in contrast to Clay's like screaming and like ranting and the utter like cacophony that happens throughout nature, Numb is a quiet and just very, very rough, hard to watch episode, because there's just so much, like, it just shows the contrast of their personality so much too. Like, Clay feels things very like intensely. He shows his emotions on his sleeve in moments where he has these breakdowns. You know, we see it in Sacrifice as well, whereas Bloberta constantly has to internalize everything, and she can't even cry in her own home, because as soon as Clay sees her, she doesn't want to show him any of that weakness. You know,
I noticed something on that scene when I was watching the recording of the Clay video back. When Clay catches her crying, she doesn't immediately stop. She looks at him for a second. She stops and she looks at him, and her shoulders they're drooped, and she's making eye contact with him, and then she pulls herself together and leaves. I think it's a very important moment, but the difference between immediately snapping out of it and for a second hanging in the air, almost, I don't want to necessarily call it hope, but just some kind of, there's a connection there, whether it's very hard to describe, but it's a very poignant moment.
Or maybe she's even like daring him to react in some way.
Yes.
To show her anything.
That whole interaction is really interesting to me, because he was going up there to pick a fight because he found the handkerchief. And, you know, we know from Sacrifice, it's not that he's trying to keep her out of like any affection, but just, you know, this idea that he has to have a family, and that's what his identity is centered on. But it's almost like he doesn't even blame her.
I've always,
you know, once he gets there, when he sees her crying, something kind of shifts in his whole demeanor, and, you know, he just follows her into the bedroom and doesn't say a word.
Exactly. I was going to say, it's very interesting that he chose to go into the bedroom after her for some privacy, instead of going to his study.
I always loved that scene. I mean, obviously that scene is brilliantly shot, but the way that she slams the door and then he immediately opens it afterwards, it's just like there are though they have a literal barrier between their beds, they're trapped inside this house with one another. They don't really have some level of solitude between them. I mean, Clay has his study, but even then we see, you know, Bloberta go in there every once in a while. It's just interesting. Obviously, there's a lot to say about the Puppingtons and their marriage.
Oh, that final shot is supposed to like symbolize them lying in their graves.
Yeah.
Wow.
But it's just so. I mean, everybody obviously has talked about that shot to death, but like it drives the point home in a way that is like irrefutable, you know. So it's
and an unlovable hand.
They're so miserable.
No, that's what we want. You want that?
No, I don't.
They're gonna
feel bad for them.
They're gonna Clockwork Orange us and make us watch the ending of Honor on loop until we get it.
I also wanted to say about Nature and so Nature and like, you know, we talked about the parallels between Clay and Bloberta in them and like their kind of like respective breaking point. And I also think it's interesting, like in these episodes, we see like kind of their most authentic selves.
Yes.
Like Clay is having this breakdown where he's saying very openly, like, he's not attracted to women. Being with women sexually has traumatized him. He feels like his life is basically over. There's nowhere for him to go. And then there's, you know, expressing all of this stuff that he's built up for so long and all the pain he's in. And then Bloberta's also in this same time period. She's, you know, being authentic and showing, you know, how lonely she is, how much she craves connection. Just kind of, you know, she's also so, I think, small in that episode, like the way she carries herself. She seems very unsure, and she's not put together in the way that she normally is.
She's
like
not putting on the mask that she shows to.
No.
Yeah, she's not holding her persona at all. You talked about that before. You worded it really well, that she kind of moves around a similar way that she does at her parents' house.
Yeah, when she's in No Hammers, she's kind of shuffling around, and her posture is really slouched, and she seems like she's trying to make herself small. And which is similar to how she moves around in Help. She's very meek and timid, and it's like she's trying to not take up space. It's like we see this version of her in Numb that it just seems so broken, and it's like very like emotionally, I think, raw and vulnerable. And we don't really get to see that from her in most episodes, because she's always carrying herself with that mask the same way Clay does. Like, and they both let their masks kind of slip in these episodes.
Just the more like we think of the fact those two episodes always take place at the same time. I feel like when I'm watching the show, sometimes I don't think about it, but like when you line them up next to each other, like there is some really, it's crazy how narratively they line up in such a way.
And I think that's really probably the first time in quite a while they'd been like really separate from each other and kind of had that freedom to like emotionally break in that way. Because Clay even says in Nature, he's like, oh, like he makes comments about how there's no one to nag me here. So it's like, and then, so, you know, you could kind of get from that. They really haven't had this physical space from each other in a really long time. And I think that gives them the freedom to let those masks fall.
Oh, so I get the sense that, you know, how they sort of project these feelings that they have about, for Bloberta, her father, and for Clay, his mother, they project some feelings about that onto each other, but they're so much more resentful towards each other. So what I think is happening is that Bloberta, underneath it all, underneath her gratefulness for the crumbs that her father gave her, she did want him to care more about her. And she's held some resentment about it. And she lets that out at Clay. And in turn, Clay lets out the resentment that he repressed that was towards his mother, who was very controlling of him.
Yeah.
I could definitely see Bloberta having like fantasies when she was younger about her dad like taking her away and like standing up for her or something, but he never does. And I could definitely see that both of them had these we could say that they're close, like in their own ways, like such close relationships with their, you know, preferred parent, but the relationships were far from perfect. I mean, Clay was smothered to death and had so much thrown onto him by his mother, so many things that he had to probably like, keep her, you know, she's a obviously very like anxious woman. Like he had to have some sort of responsibility. And then with like Bloberta, obviously, you know, it was such a distant relationship, but it's something that she clearly like took a lot from. So yeah, I could definitely see them having like regrets with how after growing up and kind of seeing the scope of things in the world, seeing what they put themselves into, being like, yeah, maybe this wasn't as great as I thought it was when I was younger.
And if they can't in their minds have almost perfect idealized version of their parents that helped them cope for so long, you know, like what else do they have? For each of them to acknowledge that some of the feelings that they feel towards each other are really something that they're feeling towards their respective favorite parent, it might break them both mentally.
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to therapy in Morrilton, so.
No, they're not. No, they're not.
So you know how in Best Christmas, when they're having their fight and Clay's accusing her of infidelity, he's looking into the mirror of the dresser, where in Numb, we find out she keeps her photo album full of pictures of Danielle, which like is all the proof he would have needed to be like, yeah, you did cheat.
Imagine if Clay ever found that photo album. Like,
well, first, I don't think he's looking through her things.
No. Because if you see that she doesn't hide the sex toys at all, they're in the top drawer of the dresser. Like she does hide the photo album because it's underneath the drawer. She has to pull the entire drawer out to get to the photo album. It's always
I'm thinking like he sees them and he's like, nope, and then goes away and doesn't touch it ever.
But like it's like thinking about like because I guess it was it was never revealed to Clay that, I know that he looked at the pictures and everything, but then he got distracted. So
honestly, I kind of feel he would have reacted the way he reacted in Honor, where it's first him being indignant and mad and then suddenly confession. Like that's what it's all about to him.
I think he knows. I don't think he needs. I think that scene in Love with him looking at the pictures is him figuring it out. I just don't know how much he cares.
I don't think he does.
Because I'm sure he's decently aware of who Danielle is as a person and some of his past.
I just want to know how the conversation afterward would go.
It would be so messy.
Like,
I almost wonder if Danielle explaining to him that he only did it to get to him would make him go like, oh, okay.
He'd probably be flattered or something.
Clay would be so into that.
He'd be like, oh my god, you cucked me for that? Oh my god.
We have to put at this point put up the gif of Debbie Ryan putting her hair behind her ear.
Like, damn. Like, he'd be so
for me.
Like, Clay's a freak. He would love it.
Clay Danielle homewrecker roleplay cut scene.
we put a poll out on the channel. Would this work on you?
You'd have to be a certain level of,
Would this work on you?
Would this pull you?
Like,
hey baby girl. Hey baby girl, if I slept with your wife and impregnated her and got you a little son, would that turn you on? Would you come play daddy with me?
But I did it for you.
Hey, what turns me on is a homosexual marriage, son. Let's come raise our son together, buddy.
Oh God.
Okay,
buddy.
I said buddy.
Buddy.
Hey, he says weird things to Clay, okay? He was like, what's that thing? He said, having a girl is the only way you can have a kid, fella. Or
having a girl is the only way you can make a baby, fella.
Yeah. Like, sometimes Danielle's
Did you have a girl?
Is crazy. Where'd he get that pink cigar? Fruits R Us? Jesus Christ. Sorry, this is hilarious, by the way. Like, I don't want to cut this, but it's really
we should get this in.
It's so funny.
Why would we cut this? It's great.
Okay. But back on topic.
Yeah.
So, in the photo album, Danielle and Bloberta look a lot younger than they did when Shapey was conceived in Beforal. And you and I were talking about this earlier. It's almost like he had been dating her before she married Clay, or like before he had even met Clay.
Oh wow!
I think it was.
Crazy.
After the marriage, because I think if Bloberta had the option of getting with Danielle and help, she would have. Obviously, he wouldn't have.
It could have been a situation. It could have been a situation where like he was trying to get into the closet just like for appearances, and then he changed his mind and ghosted her. Yeah. And then like years later, she's married and her marriage isn't going well. And he's like really into the husband. So he strikes up like an old flame situation with her and she just completely falls into it.
Yeah, I think it could be that, or it could be that that's the weird thing about like picturing it that way is definitely interesting. But it's like, how did he get into the situation with her like post the marriage? Like, was he just like, damn, like, because he didn't even meet Clay until the beginning of episode 1, right? Was that not their first meeting? Oh no, their first meeting was it before?
Was the first time.
Was it before? I'm so sorry. Oh my god.
Clay doesn't remember that he met Danielle in Beforel, and it could just be one of those situations where he was creating coincidences to meet up with him, and Clay doesn't remember any of those because they're so coincidental.
So with the whole mother thing, we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but like just kind of like how she, in a way, kind of like mimics the distance that her father has. Like she's not really present in either of these kids' life, and they're both boys, but one of them is a bastard, so he doesn't really have any kind of father figure in his life. And it's like, we see her be very cordial with Oral at times, like she can have a conversation with him, she can be nice to him, she can discipline him somewhat at times as well, at least, verbally. But at the end of the day, like, she doesn't have like a genuine connection with either of her children, and she certainly doesn't have a connection with Clay. So the main things that she does to be helpful in the home: cleaning and feeding her little baby. I did want to bring a little bit of extra dialogue on this section, but yeah, when it hit me that she referred to Shapey as a baby when she called Poppet, that was like a light bulb moment for me. It was like, wow, she does, like, I know we've like I know Ellie, you've equated like the whole relationship to like kind of viewing it like a pet. And I definitely see that aspect as well, but like it's also, to her, he's not developed, he's not a real person, he doesn't speak full sentences, he throws tantrums like a baby would, and the one thing that she feels, that provides usefulness for her, is feeding him like he's a baby.
Yeah, it's really their connection to each other.
Yeah, because I believe it's the first few months where your newborn doesn't consider you as a separate person. And obviously Shapey is old enough to understand that that's not the case anymore. But in a sense, maybe she hasn't quite grown beyond that, especially if you see Shapey in a way as kind of a manifestation of her more petulant emotions that she can't express.
For me, sometimes I think it's hard to get like a gauge on how connected Bloberta feels to Shapey specifically. Obviously she feels some kind of like affection and sentiment for him because, we see her looking at the photo album, and that's when she realizes, she doesn't have Shapey, she has Block. So obviously there's some kind of warm feelings there towards Shapey, but I also wonder like how much of it is because it's Shapey or because it's like a baby that's fulfilling her need to be needed.
Well,
exactly.
because with Block, like she had Block for months and she didn't even know because he was still meeting her needs by needing her.
Oh yeah, no, I agree with that. She cares enough where but saying something like, "Oh, I want my child back" for sentimental value is strange. But like to her, it's like, that's in a way, he's like a memento of like one time that she did feel like wanted and that she did feel like somebody cared about her in, some capacity. And it's like, she doesn't even look at him most of the time. Like he's always in her peripheral vision, and I think we've talked about this before as well. Clay obviously knew the kids were switched, she just didn't care. Like Bloberta like genuinely doesn't look at Shapey enough to realize until that moment where she's like straight on looking at Block that, oh my god, this is not him. Like,
yeah,
it's like it's just like, she's emotionally damaged in that way where like it's like there's a sentiment to Shapey, but there's also so much ill will and like bad memories connected to him that it
almost kind of reminds me of how we discussed earlier with how when she's drinking with Clay at the wedding and she gets a glimpse of herself, she's
carries a lot of shame around what she did, and obviously Shapey's a walking reminder of this thing she did that goes against like the covenant of marriage that's so like sacred in her religion.
God made sure that he looked just like Danielle too. Like God was like recessive genes. Bop, 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 bop. There you go. Like,
those stop frame genes. Like, they can not be beat.
They call them recessive, but not in that bloodline. But yeah, that's just such an interesting dynamic. I really wish that they would have gone more into it in the show, and they were just about to. I know it. Like
Yeah,
the
they
way
were.
that Sacrifice like built that up, you know, she seemed genuinely concerned when he spoke to her. It was like everything kind of clicked into place. Like finally she to some extent like understood the damage that she was doing to this child, because he's crying to her for help for the first time in like a human way, and not just screaming like predetermined phrases like a soundboard, you know, like he's giving her genuine feelings. And I'm sure that she felt the same way. She felt isolated and ignored by everybody around her. I'm sure that there was moments where she was trying to reach out to her mother and her mother wouldn't even look at her. I can see it just I feel like there's a lot of parallels between them that just were not able to be explored because everything was so late in the show, right before it got canceled. But it's really interesting.
It must have been poignant to her, especially because not only does he share his feelings with her, but it specifically revolves around the notion of hunger and loneliness. His hunger being, of course, something that she satiates with her body. It's very explicitly tied to her, not just the family in general. I love Shapey. I think we're obviously going to go more into it when we do the Shapey video, but our discussion of him has really made him grow on me as a character.
Me too.
Like it's like when people make those compilations of Oral or like the baby versions of characters from other shows, like me when I suddenly start developing maternal instincts. There's such a capacity for compassion there, especially when we see that Block isn't technically a Puppington, obviously, but no matter with how much of their own trauma Clay and Bloberta brought into the marriage, they're 3 for 3 on some pretty good kids.
Yeah. And I Shapey is one of those characters where if you don't look at him too closely, he doesn't have that much going on, but like just the things around him and how they, you know, kind of reflect onto him, it's like very...
I think he's very aware of what goes on around him, and maybe he sees things, he hears things, he knows things.
Yeah, I mean, he has to be that perceptive. I mean, no one's really looking out for him, and no one's really looking out for Shapey in any real kind of way. He really needs to be observant.
Yeah, and you know, he tries to get closer to... There's quite a few scenes in the show where he tries to, you know, be around Clay, and Clay's kind of giving him nothing as well, but... In fact, Clay's actively putting him in danger. He's like, "Here, go play with the toxic lawn chemicals, kid." I don't remember what he said to him. He said something like, "You know,
don't spill it."
Yes, and then he starts throwing it and like it's snow or something. Oh, little baby boy.
Shapey. No, I love Shapey.
He goes,
I think in our last discussion we talked about Shapey's room.
I think it's significant because, again, like, we see Bloberta cleaning the house, like, vigorously up and down. Their home is very well put together, and, you know, Shapey's room, for lack of a better word, is, like, a dumpster. Like, we see significantly when she doesn't think that the hand jack is, you know, she doesn't think she needs it anymore because she thinks that she has this person that gives a shit about her, and she's able to think about him instead. And it's a painful object, and it's horrible, as she calls it. But
it's not going to fit in her drawer.
She throws it into Shapey's room, and you know, again, she doesn't. When she does this, she opens the door. She's staring straight forward. She doesn't acknowledge the children. She doesn't do anything. She throws it in, and walks out, and doesn't look at anybody. So it's almost like that Shapey's room is like this place that she like puts everything she doesn't want to deal with anymore. And I think that's so interesting because in a way, you know, there are parallels to the way that it's staged that are very similar in ways to like her room. Like her room just has a bunch of random reused and I mean her childhood room obviously, but it has a bunch of reused props from the show. There's boxes, there's just a bunch of random shit. Like if you look, I actually with how crazy I am with this shit, I went back and I actually found a lot of those objects in other episodes. And,
oh wow.
Like the yellow dress that's in her room was actually it's one of Billy's clothing items from Repression. When Fakey's throwing all of her shit outside, that's actually the same dress.
Oh, interesting.
So a lot of the things in that frame, and even the pictures on the wall, which I like stupidly tried to like look deeper into, was literally just screenshots of random episodes. Like the screenshot of God's Blunders, it was just like the 3 nerd kids, but like her whole room is just these random items, and they're just reused props that clearly they needed to just stage something to put on there. But Shapey's room is the same way. It's full of just random items and boxes. And I just feel like there's something interesting to that they parallel in that way, and that their childhoods have some parallels. They're not one-to-ones, obviously, but, you know.
Yeah, they're not just similar, like, literally and physically, but it ties back to what I said earlier about how Shapey is almost a physical manifestation, like, in the story, of her emotions, because, you know, you have the petulant emotions that she pushes down and bottles up, but you also have his room almost acting as, like, a physical manifestation of the compartmentalization that she has to do in her everyday life, having the evidence of the affair there 24/7 screaming at her.
You know, I sorry, this is kind of like, this is not so much about Shapey, but you know, you mentioned Bloberta's childhood bedroom having all these recycled items, and, you know, it's probably because they just needed to put stuff in there, but, like, reading deeper into it, I wonder if it's, you know, kind of a reflection of Bloberta's, like, lack of a, like, distinctive personal identity.
And it's like, we obviously didn't know enough about the extent of her childhood to know, like, if, you know, she was just getting handed things that were used already by the I'm not trying to write a fanfic in the video here, but yeah, like, obviously one of the things that I've thought about is that potentially she could have been given a lot of Modella's old stuff, because, like, well, you know, they're close enough together in age. Modella's gonna grow out of something, and then she could just give it to Bloberta.
So let's say Mrs. Hymentacts, in her perfect family kind of mindset, when they purchased the house, they set up one room for a girl and one room for a boy. So Bloberta shows up and they have to just throw her into an extra room, kind of how the Puppingtons were only expecting to have one child.
Oh, bro.
I could see that.
I wish we would have seen more of her interactions with Oral.
Yeah.
I wish that we would have gotten to see, like...
You know, they a scene from Honor where she showed, like, a lot of concern about him being at Danielle's. So that's a scene that we should cut into the video so people know what they missed out on.
Oral?
Danielle, I brought you a present.
The bear or the fist. I mean, they're both nice.
What are you doing here with my son?
It's okay, Mom. We were just...
He can't even talk. What did you do to him? You're disgusting.
Yeah.
Yes.
What we got robbed of.
Yes, please go watch the Honor animatic. There are small little details like Clay and his rolled up sleeves that are very enticing. Go watch it.
I personally like when he's making his little paper airplanes during his phone call to Danielle when he's being all flirty.
His posture.
I like that.
I love his posture.
Like, you know, in Honor, when they first go in, when Danielle opens the door, she's surprised to see Oral there. And her first assumption is that Danielle was molesting him.
Mm-hmm. She says that he's disgusting.
Yeah.
And I've talked about this before, but I think that there's a degree of projection to that. Like, it's like her kind of telling that to him from, it's like her, she's really saying it. It's like how Clay is projecting, you know, his feelings onto Danielle in the same way by being like, oh, you raped my son, you know, like, with niceness. And it's like, it's very...
I mean, to be fair, it's a really fucking shifty situation for like a teacher or any adult to take someone's child and have them over at their house.
Private setting,
especially when that person is Danielle, who has inserted himself into this family by getting Bloberta pregnant and, like, stalking Clay for, like, at least 8 years.
Yeah.
And,
he is a confirmed sexual predator to multiple people in the family. Even if they don't see it that way, it's just true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and, like, that scene in the deleted scene in Honor is just so interesting because it also segues really smoothly into Clay, like, starting to accuse him as well. So it's such a small short.
It's like it's like he kind of yes-ands her because that might not even have crossed his mind. It was more of a thing like I think something else might have been in his head, and then suddenly she brings that up, and then he's accusing him.
Yeah, I do.
Well, it also kind of gives him like, oh, I can get mad right now, like, without outing myself, and then he outs himself anyway. But it gives him an excuse to kind of, like, rage at Danielle.
Yeah, it feels like it segues so smoothly. Like, I feel like the first person to assume something like that would be Bloberta and not Clay. Like, I can see why he assumed it and why they used that as the thing in Honor, but, like, I don't know. It's such a small, short scene, and I just don't know why it was cut. It's it just I feel like it adds quite a bit to it, and with Honor, like as good as that final scene in Honor is, it is kind of just like Clay and Danielle talking while like Oral, Shapey, Block, and Bloberta are all doing the standing emoji in the background.
Yeah, I feel like if they had left that scene in, it would have really made sense as to why everybody's there.
Because yeah, like Clay very deliberately like decides to bring everyone along. So like he must have, you know, had some kind of inkling that Bloberta would get very upset.
Yeah, why? Yeah, that's something to talk about another time. But yeah, I think it is kind of weird that he wanted everybody, including the two youngest children, to come with him. And it's like,
to some extent, he knows that Shapey is Danielle's because he looks exactly like Danielle. He might want some confirmation from Bloberta.
Yeah.
And he's now questioning why he's getting close to his son all of a sudden. You know?
Yeah, maybe it's like, oh, so you're going for my wife, then you're going for me, and now you're trying to come for my son.
Like, what's your deal?
It's weird. And I wonder if Shapey was just like sitting there like, oh my god, that's my dad. Oh my god, Block, that's my dad. Like
Meanwhile, Block is like dissociating to hell and back.
He's turning into like polygons.
Who are these people?
Like, what is he supposed to be thinking in this situation? Because he doesn't know any of these fucking people.
It's like if you're it's like the outside looking in of like watching one of those like public outrage videos. It's like being a bystander.
Yeah.
And he's just like
Rose on TLC right now.
Oh god, don't let the Puppingtons on TLC. They have a literal like they have a literal boy mom show.
Clay and Angela get on there.
Coming into, you know, since we've already been kind of talking about a little bit of scrapped content, I think that segues well into the kind of what we thought would potentially have happened with, you know, the whole like Shapey thing. Obviously we know that the paper mouth stuff was supposed to happen. We never got to see that. I know that I've bled every inch of possible speculation out of the supposed Sunny Bear meeting, and how I think that was actually called to my attention. I think that was you, Wes, that brought up the whole like potential. Like I thought about like Roger going to get the bear for Anne, but like you brought up that you thought maybe Blobs could have been, you know, trying to get it for Shapey to have some sort of emotional, like, what did you call it? It was like something
transitional object. A transitional object. Yeah. So
that would be so sweet.
You know, instead of like being completely attached to his mom, he can use the bear as kind of this thing that it functions as a surrogate mother in a way.
Yeah, and I kind of feel, part of me feels like, as sad as it sounds, I feel like the Shapey storyline is like him forming his own identity. Like Bloberta is almost like too emotionally like, stunted in a way to be able to give him that like intimacy that he craves. You know, she was never given that as a child either. She needs to have that to some extent before she can give that back to anybody. And when it comes to Shapey, it might be, it could very possibly be too late. You know, it could be, okay, my son needs to form his own identity and become independent because I can't give him that. Like, it's so hard to tell because we didn't get to see, obviously, how she was going to change with her whole potential relationship with Roger. But I think it would have done a lot of good for her.
It would have been so good if she had just, like, gone with Roger and dumped Clay and...
Please.
Yeah.
For Shapey, I also wonder how much of a like real emotional connection he could have formed with Bloberta, but I think the scrapped Shapey episode was supposed to be about the ways that he and Block like nurture each other and help each other grow. I'm pretty sure that's what that episode was supposed to be. And then for Bloberta and Roger, I also agree that should have happened. And then I sent that one screenshot from Honor, and like the look in her eyes, I firmly believe she in that moment, she decided she was gonna go fuck Roger.
Would they have been having that timeline wise? Like, would they have already met at that point?
Well, it depends on where Honor was actually supposed to take place.
Well,
because
Easter,
if it was supposed...
Considering Roger arrested Clay, they've met before.
Like, I'm just imagining, like, that means that Clay would have gotten arrested, and then, like, she would have had a ride in, like, the police car. With Roger and like Clay belligerent in the background, like screaming, like, why don't you hit me why don't you hit me harder? Hey, officer, these handcuffs are tight. Can you tighten them? Oh, I think I could go a little harder than that, officer. Like he just has like sexual tension in the background, and like she's just sitting there like trying to like avoid everything that's going on. And meanwhile,
poor man.
Meanwhile, Roger, her, potential future suitor, is like sitting next to her, like, damn, I wonder if they had a conversation.
That actually, that would be like a great opening to an episode about them.
Yeah.
Actually, that would have been such a good episode.
Yeah.
Detained. That's what they can call it.
Detained.
And then, like, yeah. Also,
no, wait. He in this episode we're making up on the spot. They have to go back to the station, and he gives her a malt to comfort.
Oh, that's so sweet.
With a gun on it. With a
gun on it. Of course. Of course.
He probably wonders what the hell happened. Like why her husband's so upset. He doesn't realize any of the sexual attention either. He's just Clay's in the background being so fucking weird.
I think the idea of Blobs and Roger bonding over Sunny is so sweet. Sunny as a teddy bear functions weirdly. Like, he's not a normal teddy bear with the interactive aspect of him sticking out his tongue. Even then, that action specifically, it's just not, you expect teddy bears to be like very sweet and demure, for lack of a better word, gentle.
Soft.
I don't know how to describe it, like the personality that people would usually associate with a teddy bear and the emotional feelings that it would give. And we have Roger, who's a police officer who they're supposed to be brave protectors, and he tries that. He's not very good at it, but he tries. But he's a coward at his core. And then we have Bloberta, who she's trying to try like her father, in a way.
They're both trying to try.
Yeah, exactly. They're Sunny, Bloberta, and Roger are all objects in this story as being little puppets who have a predetermined role to fill, and they're trying to their best to fill it, but they find true happiness and belonging in some place that's a little different.
I like a lot of the potentials of the relationship. I mean, I may or may not be, like, the number one Blobermouth shipper, like, in the world, but, like, in the entirety of the global moral world fandom.
Probably.
It's not a popular ship. It's not a very tight race. We'll just say that.
No, people want to see her miserable forever.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. It's honestly, how can I top that storyline? It's just
Impossible.
We love stagnation here at Moralton University. That's why we're never going to upload
we
another
love
video. We're gonna drop an honor style video on everybody, and then we're just gonna be like, the end. So it's like there's other layers to the whole, like, Blobs and Roger, like, situation where it turns sacrifice into, like, this much, like, different kind of thing in a way, because it's just Clay having this horrible tension and having this, like, super vulnerable rant in a bar with 3 men that Bloberta tried to, like, get with, and it's just his lines to Roger always make me laugh in context of, like, the whole, like, Blobermouth situation, where it's just like, yeah, you can't even score a little bit of tail, blah blah blah, and then he's insulting Florence in, like, the most disgusting way possible. It's like, oh well, he's about to, don't worry.
I think Florence should be able to go after Clay with a gun.
Yes.
Deleted episode.
I agree. If anybody in the audience or you guys have seen Meet the Feebles, she deserves to do that.
Okay, but so she would have met Roger. There's a possibility that her arc would have involved her finally divorcing Clay and getting on with her life and being with him instead. So it also brings up the question of, like, for the series with how it actually ended, the question of, like, why didn't you leave the marriage? Why didn't you leave the abusive situation? That's, a dicey sort of question to ask, because in situations like that, it's very hard. It's not always safe to leave an abusive situation. But, that's not the situation presented here, where Clay actually does want her gone. Yeah, he'd love her to leave. She, her sons, Clay has proven himself to be dangerous to be around. She, in good conscience, shouldn't have stayed with him. So the question was, like, why did she stay?
Yeah, it's like, I feel like Clay would never be the type to leave the situation, as unhappy as he is. I think he's too passive, and he's too scared. I guess this is, like, kind of his this is his mask, and he's not going to get rid of it. He doesn't want to lose, obviously he doesn't want to lose Oral, but it's like in Bloberta's case, it's like, she was ready to go. Like she didn't, the fight that they had wasn't even that explosive. It was just him accusing her and her being like, "No, I didn't do that. Leave." And he's like, "Okay, fine, I will." So, she could have left in that situation. I understand that, and things hadn't gotten to such a fever pitch that they are in, like, by the end of season 3. And, they could have went on their merry way and this, that, but, like, obviously it's not that simple. I mean, I know they clearly live in a very closed-minded, very religious, fundamentalist community where, like, that's frowned upon. But it's not like characters in the show didn't have divorces. I mean, we see, like, Fakey went through he deserved it, but, the divorce that he had was rough. Everybody knew what was going on. I'm sure that they were getting so much gossip out of that. Like,
I mean, he walked around the school in town without pants on.
Yeah, yes. And it's like, are you really gonna have that bad of an experience? Like, get divorced right after Fakey did. Like, they're gonna be talking about him, not you guys. Like,
yeah.
And I think to a degree, like, obviously they were very predisposed with the positions that they had in the community. Like, though we don't realize it until later, they are. That's a mayoral family, so there has to be some significance to that. I'm sure if the mayor broke up with his wife and they got a divorce, there would be probably quite a bit of talk about that.
Yeah, because on top of it all, if Clay wasn't the mayor, then I would understand maybe him not really having that much of a shit to give about getting divorced, but either way, Bloberta is a woman, so divorce has that much more of a weight on her reputation.
Yeah, and obviously, like, they can't bounce back the same way. Like, we don't really know the breakdowns of what happened with the divorces that we did see in the show, but I mean, it's safe to think that they would at least be getting some sort of money from the husband, because the women that we do see get divorced are able to live in the Aloneford. Like, yeah, you're relegated to, like, a shunned community where you're basically ostracized because you don't fit into society because you're it's like the whole debate of, like, the Bachelor's Arms versus the Aloneford. Like, just the way that they spin that. You're a single man in Morrilton, you're a stud, you're a I mean, it mirrors reality in a lot of ways, but it's like, go get him, guy, like...
I mean, it's also kind of a gay thing to name an all-male housing complex.
True. But the Bachelor's Arms is also a much nicer apartment complex compared to the Aloneford, which I think speaks volumes about the difference in perception of single men and single women.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say the inside of Agnes's apartment kind of looks like it hasn't been serviced in a while.
And then there's Danielle with his giant shower.
It feels like it's almost like they're like bachelor pads, they're almost like condos in a way. Like, where they look fancier. I know, like, we see them way later on, but... Yeah.
Like, with Bachelor's Arms, it's expected that they will bring other people, cough, cough, women, home. But with Aloneford, it's, you're not going to want to bring any people here. This is a cage for you until you serve your purpose, if ever.
Yeah. Now, they did such a good job with the set dressing for that. It's just, like...
Yeah.
It implies a lot. But yeah, I mean, it's like, obviously it's difficult for a woman to get divorced in Morrilton. It's possible. Not every single woman who gets divorced in Morrilton can move to Sinville like Millie.
Oh yeah, fun fact, guys. She was in Presents for God in the background of the Sinville scene.
And, I think that it was a lot of factors. Fear, like, she as much as she hates the situation that she's in, it's better than being completely by herself and alone, because I don't even know what she would do, like, if she was was completely by herself with nobody around her, because even when she was being ignored, she had people around her, a lot of people. So
she seems really prone to depression.
I mean, like, she was, like, spiraling out hard the morning after Clay left.
Oh, yeah, and kind of wanted to bring this up earlier, but I forgot. The amount of anxiety that she had about finding that handkerchief. Didn't even realize what she was, honestly, like, it took me a couple watches to even, like, realize that scene. I guess I'm a slow processor. But yeah, I mean, like, the fact that she's so she, like, tore the whole entire kitchen apart looking for it. It's like an antithesis of what she's normally doing, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. It reminds me a bit of the yarn scene. Yarn.
She does repeat herself a lot in a lot of things, and she tends to like say things that she's doing too, like for the
So in Sacrifice, when Clay is he's doing the over and over thing, I feel like he picked that up from her.
She does repeat herself a lot. Like, it's very interesting.
Yeah, that's like her thing.
And it's like even when she's like there's like the scene in Turn the Other Cheek before she gets thwacked for that's the best way I can explain it. She gets thwacked with the feather duster. She got out of that pretty unscathed, think, but she's like,
he went to town on Clay.
She's saying dusting, less dust, no dust, and it's like, it's very neurotic. Like, she shows a lot of like very anxious, weird like traits like that. And
it's like, all I do is help and help and help and help and help and help you.
Oh God, yeah, that's just like over and over and over. Oh my God.
It's even kind of like the same like cadence. It's like
I'm dead. This discussion is slapping because like I'm just like having
it's
so
really
many tonight.
Yeah, it's really the show that keeps on giving.
Yes.
Yeah. And giving and giving and giving and giving and
giving and giving and giving.
But yeah, no, I mean I would boil it down to like probably there's so many factors to it. The sense of loneliness. Being truly alone. Like I don't think she would survive. It's almost toxic in a way because it is toxic. What the hell? It's like a codependency thing. It's like she needs to have somebody around her because it kind of grounds her in a way. But she's obviously miserable. But I think if she was left alone and miserable, she would probably do worse things. If she was alone, she might actually spiral back into alcoholism. So.
She actually did have a drink in
Yeah. As soon as Danielle rejected her, that's the only other time that we ever see her drink afterwards. So little personal outro from me, Senna. Obviously, I really care about this character. I wrote this script for this video with I have a lot of personal.
12-page essay.
What'd you say?
12-page essay.
I wrote this 12-page essay about Bloberta because I just really care about this show to me, like in all honesty, I really do hope this video can help change some perspectives of people in the fandom, or at least give some more insight, because I feel like because Bloberta's a surface level character, a lot of the nuance of her character is lost, and a lot of the deeper aspects of her character and her emotional struggles are kind of lost in the mix. So she's a character that I obviously have a lot of love for, and this whole show is very important to me. But if I was to pick one character that I really was motivated to study and break down into a million little puppet pieces, it would be her for sure. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys also tune in to the next video we're going to be doing, which is going to be the breakdown of Clay. So definitely stay tuned for that. If you liked this analysis, please hit that subscribe button. I did it out of order. If you liked this video, please hit the subscribe button. Do it, because you'd be really helping me out. Thank you.